Chapter 9 of Esther Waters. This is a Library Vox recording. All Library Vox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit libraryvox.org. Recording by Peter Abraham. Esther Waters by George Moore. Chapter 9. Nearly everything came down untouched. Eating and drinking had been in progress almost all day on the course, and Esther had finished washing up before 9, and had laid the cloth in the servants' hall for supper. But if little was eaten upstairs, plenty was eaten downstairs. The mutton was finished in a trice, and Mrs. Latch had to fetch from the larder what remained of a beefsteak pudding. Even then they were not satisfied, and fine inroads were made into a new piece of cheese. Beer, according to orders, was served without limit, and 4 bottles of port were sent down so that the health of the horse might be adequately drunk. While assuaging their hunger, the men had exchanged many allusive remarks regarding the Demon's bad ending, how nearly he had thrown the race away, and the meal being now over, and there being nothing to do but to sit and talk, Mr. Leopold, encouraged by William, entered on an elaborate and technical account of the race. The women listened, playing with a rind of cheese, glancing at the cheese itself, wondering if they could manage another slice, and the men sipping their port wine, puffing at their pipes, William listening most avidly of all, enjoying each sporting term, and ingeniously reminding Mr. Leopold of some detail whenever he seemed disposed to shorten his narrative. The criticism of the Demon's horsemanship took a long while, for by a variety of suggestive remarks William led Mr. Leopold into reminiscence of the skill of certain famous jockeys in the first half of the century. These digressions wearied Sarah and Grover, and their thoughts wandered to the dresses that had been worn that day, and the lady's maid remembered she would hear all that interested her that night in the young ladies' room. At last, losing all patience, Sarah declared that she didn't care what Shifney had said when he just managed to squeeze his horse's head in front of the last dozen yards. At last, losing all patience, Sarah declared that she didn't care what Shifney had said when he just managed to squeeze his horse's head in front in the last dozen yards. She wanted to know what the Demon had done to so nearly lose the race. Had he mistaken the winning post and pulled up? William looked at her contemptuously and would have answered rudely, but at that moment Mr. Leopold began to tell the last instructions that the Gaffer had given the Demon. The orders were that the Demon should go right up to the leaders before they reached the half mile, and remain there. Of course, if he found that he was a stone or more in hand, as the Gaffer expected, he might come away pretty well as he liked, for the greatest danger was that the horse might get shut out or might show temper and turn it up. Well, said Mr. Leopold, there were 2 false starts, and Silver Braid must have galloped a couple of 100 yards afore the Demon could stop him. There wasn't 2 halfpenny worth of strength in him left. Pulling off those 3 or 4 pounds pretty well finished him. He'll never be able to ride that weight again. He said afore starting that he felt weak. You took him along too smartly from Portslade the last time you went there. When he went by himself he'd stop playing marbles with the boys round the Southwick public house. If there had been another false start, I think it would have been all up with us. The Gaffer was quite pale, and he stood there not taking his glasses from his eyes. There were over 30 of them, so you can imagine how hard it was to get them into line. However, at the 3rd attempt they were got straight, and away they came, a black line stretching across the course. Presently the black cap and jacket came to the front, and not very long after a murmur went around. Silver Braid wins. Never saw anything like it in all my life. He was 3 lengths ahead, and the others were pulling off. Damn the boy, he'll win by 20 lengths, said the Gaffer without removing his glasses. But when within a few yards of the stand, at that moment the bell rang. Mr. Leopold said, "There, they are wanting their tea. I must go and get it." "Drat their tea," said Margaret. "They can wait. Finish up. Tell us how he won." Mr. Leopold looked around, and seeing every eye fixed on him, he considered how much remained of the story, and with quickened speech continued. "Well, approaching the stand, I noticed that Silver Braid was not going quite so fast, and at the very instant the Demon looked over his shoulder and seeing he was losing ground, he took up the whip. But the moment he struck him, the horse swerved right across the course, right under the stand, running like a rat from underneath the whip. The Demon caught him one across the nose with his left hand, but seeing what was happening, the Tin Man, who was on Bullfinch, sat down and began riding. I felt as if there was a lump of ice down my back, and Mr. Leopold lowered his voice, and his face became grave as he recalled that perilous moment. "I thought it was all over," he said, and the Gaffer thought the same. I never saw a man go so deadly pale. It was all the work of a moment, but that moment was more than a year. At least so it seemed to me. Well, about halfway up the rails, the Tin Man got level with the Demon. It was 10 to 1 that Silver Braid would turn it up, or that the boy wouldn't have the strength to ride out so close a finish as it was bound to be. I thought then of the way you used to take him along from Portslade, and I would have given something to have put a pound or two of flesh into his thighs and arms. The Tin Man was riding splendid, getting every ounce and something more out of Bullfinch. The Demon, too weak to do much, was sitting nearly quite still. It looked as if it was all up with us, but somehow Silver Braid took to galloping of his own accord, and having such a mighty lot in, and he won on the post by a head, a short head. I never felt that queer in my life, and the Gaffer was no better. But I said to him, just afore the numbers went up, "It is all right, sir, he's just done it." And when the right number went up, I thought everything was on the dance, going for a swim like. By golly, it was a near thing. At the end of a long silence, Mr. Leopold said, shaking himself out of his thoughts, "Now I must go and get their tea." Esther sat at the end of the table. Her cheek leaned on her hand. By turning her eyes she could see William. Sarah noticed one of these stealthy backward glances, and a look of anger crossed her face, and calling to William she asked him when the sweepstakes money would be divided. The question startled William from a reverie of small bets, and he answered that there was no reason why the sweepstakes money should not be divided at once. There was 12. That's right, isn't it? Sarah, Margaret, Esther, Miss Grover, Mr. Leopold, myself, the 4 boys, and Swindles and Wall. Well, it was agreed that 7 should go to the first, 3 to the second, and 2 to the third. No one got the third horse, so I suppose the 2 shillings that would have gone to him had better be given to the first. Given to the first? Why, that's Esther. Why should she get it? What do you mean, no third? Wasn't Soap Bubble third? Soap Bubble was third right enough, but he wasn't in the sweep. And why wasn't he? Because he wasn't among the 11 first favourites. We took them as they were quoted in the betting list published in the Sportsman. How was it then that you put in Silver Braid? You needn't get so angry, Sarah. No one's cheating. It is all above board. If you don't believe us, you'd better accuse us straight out. What I want to know is, why was Silver Braid included? He wasn't among the 11 first favourites. Oh, don't be so stupid, Sarah. You know that we agreed to make an exception in favour of our own horse. A nice sweep it would have been if we hadn't included Silver Braid. And suppose, she exclaimed, tightening her brows, that Soap Bubble had won. What would have become of our money? It would have been returned. Everyone would have got his shilling back. And now I am to get 3 shillings, and that little Methodist or Plymouth Brethren there, whatever you like to call her, is to get 9? Said Sarah, with a light of inspiration flashing through her beer-clouded mind. Why should the 2 shillings that would have gone to Soap Bubble, if anyone had drawn him, go to the first horse rather than to the second? William hesitated, unable for the moment to give a good reason why the extra 2 shillings should be given to Silver Braid, and Sarah, perceiving her advantage, deliberately accused him of wishing to favour Esther. Don't we know that you went out to walk with her, and that you remained out till nearly 11 at night? That's why you want all the money to go to her. You don't take us for a lot of fools, do you? Never in any place I was in before would such a thing be allowed. The footman going out with the kitchen maid, and one of the dissenting lot. I am not going to have my religion insulted. How dare you?" And Esther started up from her place. But William was too quick for her. He grasped her arm. "Never mind what Sarah says." "Never mind what I says. A thing like that, who never was in a situation before, no doubt taken out of some house. Rescue work, I think they call it. She shan't insult me. No, she shan't," said Esther, tremulous with passion. "A nice sort of person to insult," said Sarah, her arms akimbo. "Now look here, Sarah Tucker," said Mrs. Latch, starting from her seat. "I'm not going to see that girl aggravated, so that she may do what she shouldn't do, and give you an opportunity of going to the missus with tales about her. Come away, Esther. Come with me. Let them go on betting if they will. I never saw no good come of it." "That's all very fine, mother, but it must be settled, and we have to divide the money." "I don't want your money," said Esther sullenly. "I wouldn't take it." "What blooming nonsense! You must take your money. Ah, here's Mr. Leopold. He'll decide it." Mr. Leopold said at once that the money that under other circumstances would have gone to the third horse must be divided between the first and second. But Sarah refused to accept this decision. Finally, it was proposed that the matter should be referred to the editor of the Sportsman, and as Sarah still remained deaf to argument, William offered her a choice between the Sportsman and the Sporting Life. "Look here," said William, getting between the women, "this evening isn't one for fighting. We have all won our little bit, and ought to be thankful. The only difference between you is 2 shillings that were to have gone to the third horse if any one had drawn him. Mr. Leopold says it ought to be divided. You, Sarah, won't accept his decision. We have offered to write to the Sportsman, and Esther has offered to give up her claim. Now, in the name of God, tell us, what do you want?" She raised some wholly irrelevant issue, and after a protracted argument with William, largely composed of insulting remarks, she declared that she wasn't going to take the 2 shillings, nor yet one of them. Let them give her the 3 she had won. That was all she wanted. William looked at her, shrugged his shoulders, and after declaring that it was his conviction that women wasn't intended to have nothing to do with horse racing, he took up his pipe and tobacco pouch. "Good night, ladies. I have had enough of you for tonight. I am going to finish my smoke in the pantry. Don't scratch all your hair out. Leave enough for me to put into a locket." When the pantry door was shut and the men had smoked some moments in silence, William said, "Do you think he has any chance of winning the Chesterfield Cup?" "He'll win in a canter if he'll only run straight. If I was the gaffer, I think I'd put up a bigger boy. He'll have to carry a 7-pound penalty, and Johnny Scott could ride that weight. The likelihood that a horse will bolt with one jockey and run straight with another was argued passionately, and illustrated with interesting reminiscences drawn from that remote past when Mr. Leopold was the gaffer's personal servant, before either of them had married, when life was composed entirely of horse racing and prize fighting. But cutting short his tale of how he had met one day the Birmingham chicken in a booth, and not knowing who he was, had offered to fight him. Mr. Leopold confessed he did not know how to act. He had a bet of 50 pounds to 10 shillings for the double event. Should he stand it out, or lay some of it off? William was thrilled with admiration. What a head, and who'd think it? That little head, hardly bigger than a coconut. What a brain there was inside. 50 pounds to 10 shillings. Should he stand it out, or hedge some of it? Who could tell better than Mr. Leopold? It would of course be a pity to break into the 50. What did 10 shillings matter? Mr. Leopold was a big enough man to stand the racket of it, even if it didn't come back. William was very proud of being consulted, for Mr. Leopold had never before been known to let anyone know what he had on a race. Next day they walked into Shoreham together. The bar of the Red Lion was full of people. Above the thronging crowd, the voice of the barman and the customers was heard calling, 2 glasses of Burton, glass of bitter, 3 of whisky cold. There were railway porters, sailors, boatmen, shop boys and market gardeners. They had all won something and had come for their winnings. Old Watkins, an elderly man with white whiskers and a curving stomach, had just run in to wet his whistle. He walked back to his office with Mr. Leopold and William, a little corner shelved out of some outhouses into which you could walk from the street. "Talk of favourites," he said, "I'd sooner pay over the 3 first favourites than this one. 30, 20 to 1 starting price, and the whole town on to him. It's enough to break any man. Now, my men, what is it?" he said, turning to the railway porters. "Just the trifle me and my mates have won over that 'ere 'orse." "What was it?" "A shilling at 5 and 20 to 1. Look it out, Joey. Is it all right?" "Yes, sir, yes, sir," said the clerk, and old Watkins slid his hand into his breeches pocket, and it came forth filled with gold and silver. "Come, come, mates, we are bound to have a bet on him for the Chesterfield. We can afford it now. What say? A shilling each?" "Done for a shilling each," said the under porter. "Finest horse in training." "What price, Massa Watkins?" 10 to 1. "Right, here's my bob." The other porters gave their shillings. Watkins slid them back into his pocket and called to Joey to book the bet. "And now, what is yours, Mr. Latch?" William stated the various items. He had had a bet of 10 shillings to 1 on one race and had lost. He had had half a crown on another and had lost. In a word, 3 and 6 pence had to be subtracted from his winnings on Silver Braid. These amounted to more than £5. William's face flushed with pleasure, and the world seemed to be his when he slipped 4 sovereigns and a handful of silver into his waistcoat pocket. Should he put a sovereign of his winnings on Silver Braid for the Chesterfield? Half a sovereign was enough. The danger of risking a sovereign, a whole sovereign, frightened him. "Now, Mr. Latch," said old Watkins, "if you want to back anything, make up your mind. There are a good many besides yourself who have business with me." Williams hesitated, and then said he'd take 10 half sovereigns to 1 against Silver Braid. 10 half sovereigns to 1, said old Watkins. William murmured, "Yes," and Joey booked the bet. Mr. Leopold's business demanded more consideration. The fat betting man and the scarecrow little butler walked aside and talked, both apparently indifferent to the impatience of a small number of customers. Sometimes Joey called in his shrill cracked voice if he might lay 10 half-crowns to 1 or 5 shillings to 1, as the case might be. Watkins would then raise his eyes from Mr. Leopold's face and nod or shake his head, or perhaps would sign with his fingers what odds he was prepared to lay. With no one else would Watkins talk so lengthily, show so much deference. Mr. Leopold had the knack of investing all he did with an air of mystery, and the deepest interest was evinced in this conversation. At last, as if dismissing matters of first importance, the two men approached William, and he heard Watkins pressing Mr. Leopold to lay off some of that £50. "I'll take 12 to 1, £24 to 2. Shall I book it?" Mr. Leopold shook his head and, smiling enigmatically, said he must be getting back. William was much impressed, and congratulated himself on his courage in taking the 10 sovereigns to 1. Mr. Leopold knew a thing or two. He had been talking to the gaffer that morning, and if it hadn't been all right, he would have laid off some of the money. Next day, one of the gaffer's 2-year-olds won a race, and the day after, Silver Braid won the Chesterfield Cup. The second victory of Silver Braid nearly ruined old Watkins. He declared that he had never been so hard hit. But as he did not ask for time and continued to draw notes and gold and silver in handfuls from his capacious pockets, his lamentations only served to stimulate the happiness of the fortunate backers, and listening to the sweet note of self-ringing in their hearts, they returned to the public house to drink the health of the horse. So the flood of gold continued to roll into the little town decrepit and colourless by its high shingle beach and long reaches of muddy river. The dear gold jingled merrily in the pockets, quickening the steps, lightening the heart, curling lips with smiles, opening lips with laughter. The dear gold came falling softly, sweetly as rain, soothing the hard lives of working folk. Lives pressed with toil lifted up and began to dream again. The dear gold was like an opiate. It wiped away memories of hardship and sorrow. It showed life in a lighter and merrier guise. And the folk laughed at their fears for the morrow and wondered how they could have thought life so hard and relentless. The dear gold was pleasing as a bird on the branch, as a flower on the stem. The tune it sang was sweet, the colour it flaunted was bright. The trade of former days had never brought the excitement and the fortune that this horse's hoofs had done. The dust they had thrown up had fallen a happy golden shower upon Shoreham. In every corner and crevice of life the glitter appeared. That fine red dress on the builder's wife, and the feathers that the girls flaunt at their sweethearts, the loud trousers on the young man's legs, the cigar in his mouth, all is Goodwood gold. It glitters in that girl's ears and on this girl's finger. It was said that the town of Shoreham had won £2,000 on the race. It was said that Mr. Leopold had won 200. It was said that William Latch had won 50. It was said that Wall, the coachman, had won 25. It was said that the gaffer had won £40,000. For 10 miles around, nothing was talked of but the wealth of the Barfields, and drawn like moths to a candle, the county came to call. Even the most distant and reserved left cards. Others walked up and down the lawn with the gaffer, listening to his slightest word. A golden prosperity shone upon the yellow Italian house. Carriages passed under its elm trees every hour and swept round the evergreen oaks. Rumour said that large alterations were going to be made, so that larger and grander entertainments might be given. An Italian garden was spoken of, balustrades and terraces. Stables were in course of construction. Many more racehorses were bought. They arrived daily, and the slender creatures, their dark eyes glancing out of the sight holes in their cloth hoods, walked up from the station, followed by an admiring and commenting crowd. Drink and expensive living, dancing and singing, upstairs and downstairs, and the jollifications culminated in a servants' ball given at the Shoreham Gardens. All the Woodview servants, excepting Mrs. Latch, were there. Likewise all the servants from Mrs. Northcote's, and those from Sir George Preston's, 2 leading county families. A great number of servants had come from West Brighton, and Lancing and Worthing, altogether between 200 and 300. Evening dress is indispensable was printed on the cards. The butlers, footmen, cooks, ladies' maids, housemaids and housekeepers hoped by this notification to keep the ball select, but the restriction seemed to condemn Esther to play again the part of Cinderella. End of chapter 9.